Oh, I love aliens. I really like aliens. I don't know if aliens would like me back. Well, I suppose it depends on the alien. If it's a xenomorph, I think that xenomorphs would like me. Oven baked, with a little olive oil on top. Parsley, oregano. At least the oregano. People don't know how to cook anymore. Lex Fridman, how many alien civilizations are out there? I don't know who the guest is, but this topic intrigues me a lot. Love it.
This video is about optimistic, pessimistic, and my own estimates of how many intelligent alien civilizations might be out there.
Adam Frank, episode 455, Lex Fridman. Adam Frank, alien civilization and the search for extraterrestrial life.
If we don't ask...
We don't ask. Okay, I won't ask, but I'll watch. Is it the grace of the reptilians? Said don't ask.
If we don't ask how long do they last, but instead ask what's the probability that there have been any civilizations at all, no matter how long they lasted. I'm not asking whether they exist now or not. I'm just asking in general about probabilities to make a technological civilization anywhere and at any time in the history of the universe.
Oh, this is so interesting. Man, I need popcorn for this. Like, I mean it. I'm not being sarcastic. I love this kind of talk.
And that we were able to constrain. And so what we found was basically that there have been 10 billion trillion habitable zone planets in the universe. And what that means is those are 10 billion trillion experiments that have been run. And the only way that we're the only time that this is, this whole process from, abiogenesis to a civilization has occurred is if every one of those experiments failed, right? So therefore you could put a probability, we called it the pessimism line, right? We don't really know what nature sets for the probability of making intelligent civilizations, right? But we could set a limit using this. We could say, look, as if the probability per habitable zone planet is less than 10 to the minus 22, 1 in 10 billion trillion, then yeah, we're alone. If it's anywhere larger than that, then we're not the first. It's happened somewhere else. And to me, that...
Fascinating. Okay, so it's a very mathematical, statistical approach to the question, which if you think about it, even the Fermi paradox, and I'm the only one who can pronounce that right, Fermi. Yeah, it also means stop in Italian. Paradox is also a sort of mathematical approach to the question of are we alone in the universe? So I like this.
That was mind-blowing. It doesn't tell me there's anybody nearby. The galaxy could be sterile. It just told me that, unless nature's really it has some bias against civilizations, we're not the first time this has happened. This has happened elsewhere over the course of cosmic history.
Cosmic history, my gosh.
The following is a conversation with Adam Frank, an astrophysicist interested in the evolution of star systems and the search for alien civilizations in our universe.
Now, I'm not an astrophysicist, but I'm also interested in everything else he said, so I'm here for the ride.
This is the Lex Fridman podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Adam Frank. You wrote a book about aliens. So the big question...
Light of the Stars. Ooh, that is beautiful. Title, Alien Worlds and the Fate of the Earth. Adam Frank. I'll have to check this book out on eBay. How much is it? $15. Nice. I might order it just to have a look. It's funny that there is another one called Light the Stars, which is a kind of romance, I think. I don't think that's the one. Is this the one? No, I don't think. Unless that's him when he was young, I mean...
How many alien civilizations are out there?
Yeah, that's the question, right? The amazing thing is that after 2.5 millennia of, people yelling at each other or setting each other on fire occasionally over the answer, we now actually have the capacity to answer that question. So in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to have data relevant to the answer to that question. We're going to have hard data, finally, that will, one way or the other, even if we don't find anything immediately, we will have gone through a number of planets. We'll be able to start putting limits on how common life is. The one answer I can tell you, which was an important part of the problem, is how many planets are there, right? Mm-hmm. And just like people have been arguing about the existence of life elsewhere for 2,500 years, people have been arguing about planets for the exact same amount of time, right? You can see Aristotle yelling at Democritus about this. You can see they had very wildly different opinions about...
He has Lex Fridman has the strangest keyboard I've ever seen on my planet, on my life, not my planet. I mean, on the planet too, I suppose. That is the weirdest keyboard.
Aristotle yelling at Democritus about this. You can see they had very wildly different opinions about how common planets were going to be and how unique Earth was. And that question got answered, right? Which is pretty remarkable that in a lifetime you can have a 2,500-year-old question. The answer is they're everywhere. There are planets everywhere. And it was possible that planets were really rare. We didn't really understand how planets formed.
Sure.
And so if you go back to, say, the turn of the 20th century, there was a theory that said planets formed when two stars passed by each other closely, and then material was...
I actually remember being told that when I was in school, possibly like middle school.
Gravitationally squeezed out, in which case those kinds of collisions are so rare that you would expect 1 in a trillion stars to have planets. Instead, every star in the night sky has planets.
So one of the things you've done is simulated the formation of stars. How difficult do you think it is to simulate the formation of planets, like simulate our solar system through the entire evolution of the solar system? This is kind of a numerical simulation sneaking up to the question of how many planets are there.
Right.
That actually we're able to do now. There is.
I love these kind of simulations. I don't know if you guys checked out the simulation of biological life and how it changes and adapts to the environment, but done through a computer system. It is such a fascinating video. I haven't reacted to it or anything because, yes, it is kind of outside the spectrum of what I usually cover here, but it is a video that if I find it, I'll put a link in the description, because that's another type of simulation that really is fascinating, and it shows whether or not a certain set of parameters will influence the development of certain skills or certain tendency within any given population cluster. It's absolutely fascinating stuff. Very difficult to follow along, by the way, if you're not in the realm of mathematics, biology, or physics.
Can run simulations of the formation of planetary system. So if you run the simulation, really where you want to start is a cloud of gas, these giant interstellar clouds of gas that may have, 1 million times the mass of the sun in them. And so you run a simulation of that. It's turbulent. The gas is roiling and tumbling. And every now and then you get a place where the gas is dense enough that gravity gets hold of it and it can pull it downward. So you'll start to form a protostar. And a protostar is basically the young star of this ball of gas where nuclear reactions are getting started. But it's also a disk. So as material falls inward, because everything's rotating, as it falls inward, it'll spin up and then it'll form a disk. Material will collect in what's called an accretion disk or a protoplanetary disk.
Man, that is fascinating. Plus, I love these kind of computer-generated images. It's spectacular, man. They're so fascinating.
And you can simulate all of that. Once you get into the disk itself and you want to do planets, things get a little bit more complicated because the physics gets more complicated. Now you got to start worrying about dust, because actually dust is the wrong word. It's smoke, really. These are the tiniest bits of solids. They will coagulate in the disk to form pebbles, right? And then the pebbles will collide to form rocks, and then the rocks will form boulders, et cetera, et cetera. That process is super complicated, but we've been able to simulate enough of it to begin to get a handle on how planets form, how you accrete enough material to get the first proto-planets or planetary embryos, as we call them. And then the next...
That is an awesome name for it.
...step is those things start slamming into each other to form, planetary-sized bodies. And then the planetary bodies slam into each other. Earth, the moon.
I wonder at what point then in this process the mass that is now creating generates its own gravitational field that may attract more matter. I wonder.
Moon came about because there was a Mars-sized body that slammed into the Earth and basically blew off all the material that then eventually formed the moon.
And all of them have different chemical compositions, different temperatures?
Yeah, so the temperature of the material in the disk depends on how far away you are from the star. So it decreases, right? And so there's a really interesting point. So close to the star, temperatures are really high. And the only thing that can condense, that can kind of freeze out, is going to be stuff like metals. So that's why you find Mercury is this giant ball of iron, basically. And then as you go further out, stuff, the gas gets cooler, and now you can start getting things like water to freeze, right? So there's something we call the snow line, which is somewhere in our solar system out around between Mars and Jupiter. And
between Mars and Jupiter, you have the snow line. The dashed white line represents the snow line. So this one here, I suppose. Yeah, because this is Jupiter. So boom, like that. Proto-Earth. So this is a sort of a recreation image of the past. You have the Sun, Proto-Earth, Proto-Mars, Vesta. What a nice name. Or Vesta, if you want to read it in classical. And this guy's amazing. The kind of guests Lex Fridman has are insane. It's nice.
And that's the reason why the giant planets in our solar system, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all have huge amounts of ice in them, or water and ice. Actually, Jupiter and Saturn don't have so much, but the moons do.
Because they're gas giants, right?
The moons have so much water in them that there's oceans, right? That we've got a number of those moons have got more water on them than there's water on Earth.
Seriously, I got to listen to this one again. Say it again.
Right? That we've got a number of those moons have got more water on them than there's water on Earth.
That's insane. What a fun fact. I imagine, is that related to size? Because when I imagine it, then again, it's not like I'm into astronomy in any way, apart from what I studied in high school, I suppose. So when you imagine a moon of either Jupiter or Saturn, I think he was talking about, and then he says something like this, I wonder how big these moons are. I probably have to Google it, because if it's a moon that is bigger than the size of the Earth, that's not what I was imagining, though. I thought they would be smaller. Then the fact that if they have water in them, the oceans are actually, there's more water in that one of those moons than there is on planet Earth, it would make sense. But if these moons are the way I had imagined them, so being still smaller, large moons, but smaller than planet Earth, because the Earth is already a huge percentage of water, so are we talking that the water is deeper? Or are they completely... I got to Google this, because I don't think he's going to explain it. Take it for granted that I'm not a Muppet, but I am a Muppet, so I don't know. How big is Jupiter's moon? There are 95 moons on Jupiter. Holy moly. It's like, which one? If Wikipedia is correct. But usually when it comes to very basic information like this, Wikipedia is fine. Wikipedia becomes a problem, and in fact, highly incorrect when you go into the meats and bones of information. Then it starts repeating stuff that people just write. But I mean, I don't think someone just made up this number and wrote it on Wikipedia just to F with me. The largest of these moons were likely asteroids that were captured. Well, yeah, okay, but how big are we talking? So, Europa is slightly smaller than Earth's moon. So, Europa is small. But then it also says that there are bigger ones. At least when it comes to Europa, I wasn't wrong. Yeah, so I wonder if these moons have more water than planet Earth, unless one of those moons is actually bigger than Earth, then I would understand. But if these also meaning this for those moons that are not as big as planet Earth, then I wonder how that happens.
Do you think it's possible to do that kind of simulation to have a stronger and stronger estimate of how likely an Earth-like planet is? Can we get the physics simulation done well enough to where we can start estimating, like, what are the possible Earth-like things that could be generated?
Yeah, I think we can. I think we're learning how to do that now. So, one part is like trying to just figure out how planets form themselves and doing the simulations.
In the first place, of course, because if you don't understand the process well, you can't simulate it.
Like that cascade from dust grains up to planetary embryos. That's hard to simulate because it's both. Right. You got to do both the gas and you got to do the dust and the dust colliding and all that physics. Once you get up to a planet-sized body, then you kind of have to switch over to almost like a different kind of simulation. There, often what you're doing is you're assuming the planet is this sort of spherical ball, and then you're doing like a 1D, a radial calculation. And you're just asking.
That's also one more thing that I'd like to underline here, since he just used the word spherical ball. And I want to connect it with flat Earth and the flat Earth movement for a second. That, of course, I'm not a flat earther. If you are a flat earther, it's not like, it's your freedom, mate, but it's also my freedom. It's not like I'm going to hate you or bully you, but of course, I don't believe in it 100%. I just don't. So I'm not trying to be offensive or anything. But anyways, that's also one of the reasons why I find flat Earth so strange as an idea. I wouldn't even call it a theory, since to be a theory, in science. There has to be, it's actually pretty high. It's higher than an hypothesis. Is that every other body that we see, that we observe, is a sphere. The sun is a sphere, other planets are spheres. Why is planet Earth the only one that isn't a sphere then? Unless you want to tell me that it's all a conspiracy, and so not only the images that represent planet Earth have been faked with CGI, but so is every other image about the cosmos, the universe, planets, and anything that we've ever observed. Basically, all of that would have been faked. Because the moment you tell me that as a flat earther, you believe that those planets are correct, like, yeah, Mars is a sphere, then why is it's the only one is the Earth that isn't one? I really think, in my opinion, the craziest part of all that is that all countries, every single one of them, even though we disagree and we wage war at each other constantly, we speak different languages, but yet with this one thing, we all coordinated. You know, if it was only the US that said that the planet Earth is a sphere, but there were like 15 other countries that said, no, it's flat, then I could understand. But everyone, Asia, Korea, Japan, India, Italy, Europe, America, Russia, we all say to keep it a secret from you, from me. Am I that important? Wow, I didn't know it was that important. Man, that level of coordination is insane, since we can't coordinate for anything else. But anyways, yeah, a little off topic, I suppose.
How is this thing going to, what is the structure of it going to be? Like, am I going to have a solid iron core, or am I going to get a solid iron core with that liquid iron core out around it, like we have on
Earth, yeah.
And then you get, a silicate, kind of a rocky mantle, and then a crust. All of those details, those are kind of beyond being able to do full 3D simulations from ab initio, from scratch. We're not there yet.
How important are those details, like the crust and the atmosphere, do you think?
Hugely important. So I'm part of a collaboration at the University of Rochester where we're using the giant laser. This is called the Laboratory for Laser Energetics. We got a huge grant from the NSA.
Laboratory for Laser Energetics. Yeah, it'd be nice. Could you imagine, like, excuse me, what do you do for work? Oh, I work at the Laboratory for Laser Energetics. My God. Okay. Sorry, I asked.
To use that laser to like slam tiny pieces of silica to understand what the conditions are like at, the center of the Earth, or even more importantly, the center of super Earths. Like this is what's wild. The most common kind of planet in the universe, we don't have in our solar system, which is amazing, right?
Really?
So we've been able to study enough or observe enough planets now to get a census. We kind of have an idea of who's average, who's weird.
Yeah.
And our solar system's weird because the average planet has a
Doesn't surprise me, considering the amount of weird people that live on this planet.
mass somewhere between
Me included.
between a few times the mass of the Earth to maybe, 10 times the mass of the Earth. And that's exactly where there are no planets in our solar system. So the smaller ones of those we call super Earths. The larger ones we call sub-Neptunes. And they're anybody's guess. Like, we don't really know what happens to material when you're squeezed to those pressures, which is like millions, tens of millions of times the pressure on the surface of the Earth. So those details really will matter of what's going on in there, because that will determine whether or not you have, say, for example, plate tectonics. We think plate tectonics may have been really important for life on Earth, for the evolution of complex life on Earth.
Really?
So it turns out, and this is sort of the next generation where we're going with the understanding the evolution of planets and life. It turns out that you actually have to think hard about the planetary context for life. You can't just be like, oh, there's a warm pond, and then some interesting, chemistry happens in the warm pond. You actually have to think about the planet as a whole and what it's gone through in order to really understand whether a planet is a good place for life or not.
Why do you think plate tectonics might be useful?
Okay, plate tectonics may be interesting, but I want to talk about the extinction events, biosphere, technosphere, emergence of intelligence. This is incredible. 3 hours and 26 minutes. We've got to do a few episodes on this if you guys like it, but let's go into extinction events. Of course, I'm just going to check out a few sections, but as I always say on my response videos, please click the link in the description below or the pinned comment to go check out the full episode. Today, we're just reviewing a few things.
To evolution.
I wonder if there's some extremely elevated levels of chaos, almost like catastrophes, behind every leap of evolution. Like, you're not going to have leaps Like in human societies, we have like an Einstein that comes up with a good idea, but it feels like on an evolutionary time scale, you need some real big drama going on for the evolutionary system to have to come up to a solution to that drama, like an extra complex solution to that drama.
Well, I think I'm not sure if that's true. I don't know if it needs to be like an almost extinction event, right? Because it's certainly true that we have gone through almost extinction events, right? We've had 5 mass extinctions.
Yeah, if anything, I think it would be advantageous to life if it didn't happen. But I do understand where it's coming from. I wonder if there is a causal link between the idea of an extinction event, which is something we have talked about because, of course, on this channel we did speak about that.
But you don't necessarily see that like there was this giant evolutionary leap happening after those. So, with the comet impact, the KT boundary, certainly, lots of niches opened up. And that's why we're here, right? Because, our ancestors were just little, basically rodents, rats, living under the footsteps of the dinosaurs.
Really? Your ancestors were the Skaven? Will you look at that? My ancestors were the ancient Romans.
And it was that comet impact that opened the route for us. But it wasn't, that still took another 65 million years. It wasn't like this thing immediately happened. But what we found with this hard steps paper, because the whole idea of the hard steps paper was, it was one of these anthropic reasoning kinds of things where Brandon Carter said, oh, look, the intelligence doesn't show up on Earth until about, almost close to when the end of the sun's lifetime. And so he's like, well, there should be no reason why the sun's lifetime and the time for evolution to produce intelligence should be the same. And so therefore, and he goes through all this reasoning, anthropic reasoning, and he ends up with the idea that like, oh, it must be that the odds of getting intelligence are super low. And so that's the hard steps, right? So there was a series of steps in evolution that were, very, very hard. And because of that, you can calculate some probability distributions. And everybody loves a good probability distribution, and they went a long way with this. But it turns out that the whole thing is flawed because on one, when you look at it, of course, the time scale for the sun's evolution and the time scale for evolution on life are coupled, because life and the time scale for evolution of the Earth is about the same time scale as the evolution as the sun. It's billions of years. The Earth evolves over billions of years.
Right.
And life and the Earth co-evolve. That's what Brandon Carter didn't see, is that actually the fate of the Earth and the fate of life are inextricably combined.
Makes sense.
And this is really important for astrobiology too. Life doesn't happen on a planet; it happens to a planet. So this is something.
Oh, I love that. Life doesn't happen on a planet; it happens to a planet. We do need a pause to think. That is a very deep statement.
That David Grinspoon and Sarah Walker both say, and I agree with this. It's a really nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
Plate tectonics, the evolution of oxygen, of an oxygen atmosphere, which only happened because of life. These things, these are things.
Of course, he's talking about vegetable life at that point, because isn't it crazy the way I understand it? But do correct me if I'm wrong, since I'm outside or any form of field of expertise here, nor do I have an astronomy specialist or even a biologist in the team. So I'm going to have to rely on the comments here. So take what I say with a pinch of salt. But I do remember reading that oxygen at first was actually poisonous, but then life adapted to it, or something like that. You'll correct me if I'm wrong anyways.
That are happening where life and the planet are sort of sloshing back and forth. And so rather than, to your point about do you need giant catastrophes, maybe not giant catastrophes, but what happens is as the Earth and life are evolving together, windows are opening up, evolutionary windows. Like, for example, life put oxygen into the atmosphere. When life invented this new form of photosynthesis about 2.5 billion years ago, that broke water apart to, work to do its chemical shenanigans. It broke water apart and pushed oxygen into the atmosphere. That's why there's oxygen in the atmosphere. It's only because of life. That opened up huge possibilities, new spaces for evolution to happen. But it also changed the chemistry of the planet forever. So the introduction of oxygen photosynthesis changed the planet forever, and it opened up a bunch of windows for evolution that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Like, for example, You and I, we need that amount of oxygen. Big-brained creatures need an oxygen-rich atmosphere.
And when he says oxygen rich, within a certain percentage, of course, because if you scale up that oxygen percentage too high, it becomes a problem. You will get oxygen poisoning, which is why I was mentioning that thing. And of this one, I am certain. If you give too much oxygen, it's actually bad for you. And I don't think you can survive it for very long if you are like at extremely high percentages of oxygen. But at the same time, if you go too low, as it happens sometimes when you go up the mountains, that the oxygen is actually sparse or at a lower degree, then it starts to become a problem so we do exist in a good percentage of oxygen. And if you change those, of course, zero oxygen, we all die. But too much oxygen, we die too.
Because oxygen is so potent for metabolism. So you couldn't get intelligent creatures 100 million years after the planet formed.
So really, on a scale of a planet, when there's billions, trillions of organisms on a planet, they can actually have planetary scale impact.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the chemical shenanigans of an individual organism, when scaled out to trillions, can actually change a planet.
Yeah, and we know this for a fact now.
Yeah.
Like so there was this thing, Gaia theory, that with James
Love the name Gaia for the planet.
Lovelock introduced in the 70s, and then Lynn Margulis, the biologist Lynn Margulis, together. So this Gaia theory was the idea that planets pretty much life takes over a planet. Life hijacks a planet in a way that the sum total of life creates these feedbacks between the planet and the life, such that it keeps the planet habitable. It's kind of a homeostasis, right? I can go out, like right now outside, it's 100 degrees, right? And I go outside, but my internal temperature is going to be the same. And I can go back to, Rochester, New York in the winter, and it's going to be, 0 degrees, but my internal temperature is going to be the same. That's homeostasis. The idea of Gaia theory was that life, the biosphere, exerts this pressure on the planet, or these feedbacks on the planet, that even as other things are changing, the planet will always stay in the right kinds of conditions for life. Now, when this theory came out, it was very controversial. People were like, "Oh my God, what are you smoking weed?" And
I like discussing innovative theories, and I honestly think that people that just reject theories a priori without even taking a second to try and figure out, okay, but where are they coming from, particularly when it's from qualified individuals, I think they're being closed-minded. Science needs to change. Academia needs to constantly evolve, if we want to use the term and apply. And that evolution comes from change, in the sense that eventually we have to upgrade into a better way of thinking, or sometimes new theories, which may sound crazy. I mean, think about it. If you had told a medieval person one day we will be able to fly and build machines that are flight capable, so they can be airborne, and we will be able to move from one side of the planet to the other in a matter of hours, they'd be like, "You're out of your mind. What are you been smoking?" But the reality of fact is that it did happen. If we keep surviving and we keep evolving technologically speaking, then we will get to a point where the sort of technology that we'll be capable to produce as a species in, say, 1,000 years will be absolutely unthinkable for us. And if we were to see it, we would think it is absolutely magic. And it is possible that if we were to meet humans that are that advanced, that they would appear to be gods to us. And because of the sort of power that they could have and the sort of things that they could do, not only when it comes to transportation, which is of course an interesting way to put it, but also in general. I mean, think about computer science. Present that to a person in the Stone Age. What they had was impressive for the period in which they were living, but the stuff we have now, and not to mention even the upgrades that we did and the discoveries in the last 100 years alone, impressive.
There were all these Gaian festivals with Gaian dances, and so
it sounds like the 60s.
It became very popular in the New Age community.
Yeah.
But Lovelock, actually, they were able to show that, no, this has nothing to do with like the planet being conscious or anything. It was about these feedbacks that by the biology, the biosphere can exert these feedbacks. And now that's become, whether or not we're still unclear whether there are true Gaian feedbacks in the sense that the planet can really exert complete control. But it is absolutely true that the biosphere is a major player in Earth's history.
So
Spectacular. I really liked this section. So I'm going to check out the technosphere section, and then we'll look at the emergence of intelligence, and then I'll stop it right before the Drake equation. So if you want to go finish watching this, then you can totally do it by clicking the link in the description, but we will get to the alien civilization. Technosphere, let's go.
the biosphere fights for homeostasis on Earth.
Okay, what I would say right now is I don't know if I can say that scientifically. I can certainly say that the biosphere does a huge amount of the regulation of the planetary state, and over billions of years has strongly modified the evolution of the planet. So whether or not a true Gaian feedback would be exactly what you said, right? The biosphere is this somehow, and Sarah Walker and David Grinspoon and I actually did a paper on this about the idea of planetary intelligence or cognition across a planetary scale. And I think that actually is possible. It's not conscious, but there is a kind of cognitive activity going on. The biosphere, in some sense, knows what is happening because of these feedbacks. So it's still unclear whether we have these full Gaian feedbacks, but we certainly have semi-Gaian feedbacks. If there's a perturbation on the planet,
that would be my face exactly if I was having this conversation with this gentleman.
Scale, temperature, insolation, how much sunlight's coming in, the biosphere will start to have feedbacks that will damp that perturbation. Temperature goes up, the biosphere starts doing something, temperature comes down.
Now, I wonder if the technosphere also has a Gaian feedback or elements of a Gaian feedback, such that the technosphere will also fight to some degree for homeostasis.
Man, how do you prepare for a guest like this? Well, I mean, I suppose if you're an astrophysicist, you could. But someone like me, I wouldn't know what to ask. I'm impressed that Lex Fridman can keep up and ask him relevant questions that the scientist is like, oh, yeah, or oh, no, and that kind of stuff.
Open question, I guess.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question.
See?
Because that paper that David and Sarah and I wrote, what we were arguing is that over the history of a planet, right, when life first forms, 3.8 billion years ago, it's kind of thin on the ground, right? You've got the first species, these are all microbes, and they have not yet they're not going to, enough of them to exert any kind of these Gaian feedback. So we call that an immature biosphere.
Mm-hmm. I think I see where he's going. And if you think about it once again, I think this is so interesting.
But then as time goes on, as life becomes more robust and it begins to exert these feedbacks, keeping the planet in the place where it needs to be for life, we call that a mature biosphere, right? And the important thing, and I'm sure later on, we're going to talk about definitions of life and such.
Yeah.
There's this great term called autopoiesis, that Francisco Varela, the neurobiologist Francisco Varela, came up with. And he said, one of the defining things about life is this property of autopoiesis, which means self-creating and self-maintaining. Life does not create the conditions which will destroy itself, right? It's always trying to keep itself in a place where it can stay alive. I
wonder how you justify that in connection with intelligence, how we evolved in the sense that, we are threatening to nuke each other out. So unless I'm misunderstanding, is this like before the advent of intelligence, or at least mechanical or technological intelligence?
Biosphere, from this Gaian perspective, has been autopoietic for billions of years. Now, we just invented this technosphere in the last couple of hundred years.
Okay, so he was talking about the biosphere.
And what we were arguing in that paper is that it's an immature technosphere, right? Because right now, with climate change and all the other things we're doing, the technosphere right now is sort of destroying the conditions under which it needs to maintain itself. So the real...
And war, really, that's the one that I would be more worried about before anything else. Nuclear war, the ability that we have as a species to not only destroy our enemies, but destroy ourselves in the process. Nuclear winter, the fact that we can even conceive as a species the option of mutual annihilation. That should be something that we're not even capable of conceiving, but we are. And in fact, we threaten each other with it, our leaders at least. Probably we have to reform. I wish there was a point in the way our civilizations matured, whereby we found a way to put the right people on top. Because the reality of fact is that there are so many factors whereby oftentimes, even just look at the 20th century, you got people with power, Benito Mussolini, the Austrian painter, Stalin, monsters. evil people, and yet they are the ones that are at the top. And I wish we found a way to regulate each other so that the people that are our leaders are in fact the best of us. Wouldn't that be amazing if that could be the case? Like people that really have in mind the benefits of us as a species cumulatively, rather than their own personal gains and their own warmongering due to power and resource accumulation, which is really what happened. And who knows, maybe one day, maybe AI will do that for us.
Job for us if we're going to last over, geologic timescales. If we want a technosphere that's going to last tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, then we've got to become mature, which means to not undermine the conditions, to not subvert the conditions that you need to stay alive. So as of right now, I'd say we're not autopoietic.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder
Makes
if we
sense.
look across thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, that perturbations, the technosphere should create perturbations as a way for developing greater and greater defenses against perturbations, which sounds like a ridiculous statement, but basically...
I don't know what perturbations is. I don't know what it means in this case.
Go out and play in the yard and hurt yourself to strengthen the, or like drink water from the pond.
From the pond, yeah, right.
To
Get sick a
strengthen-
few times.
to strengthen the immune system.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting with the technosphere, we could talk about this more, but we're just emerging as a technosphere in terms of as a interplanetary technosphere, right? That's really the next step for us is to...
Yeah, I really hope that we can get to see that. There is talk now that I remember Elon Musk was saying that we will be on Mars in the 30s. So he was even saying as early as 2030 for a man-made, maybe even the first colony on Mars. I don't know if that's going to happen. It's only in pretty much 5 years from now, so I don't know if it's going to happen in 2030. But if it happens in the 30s, then we'll get to see it. That's something that I'm so looking forward to. Imagine the idea of humans being born on Mars. There will be humans if this continues, and we have colonies first, and then cities, and then countries on Mars. There will be humans that will be born on Mars and will have never seen the Earth. And that is incredible because we are Earthlings. Would they be considered Earthlings at that point, or are they Martians even though they originate here? We need to redefine our legislations. Who owns what? What about their laws? Do they get to choose and pick the laws, or do they have to stick to our flags and laws here? What if they rebel? Kind of similar to what happened between Britain and America, but between Earth and Mars, where at one point Mars is like, well, we don't care about what you say. We don't need to pay you taxes. And then they build their own civilizations and nations and laws. Man, that is such a fascinating topic.
David Grinspoon talks about, I love this idea of anti-accretion, like this amazing thing that for the first time, over the entire history of the planet, stuff is coming off the planet, right? It used to be everything just fell down, all the meteorites fell down. But now we're starting to push stuff out. And, like the idea of planetary defense or such.
Including radio signals, not just people or material, but information is going out, and it has been.
We are actually going to start exerting perturbations on the solar system as a whole. We're going to start engineering if we make it, right? I always like to say that if we can get through climate change, the prize at the end is the solar system, right? So we will be literally engineering the solar system. But what you can think of right now with what's happening with the Anthropocene, the great acceleration that is the technosphere, is the creation of it. That is a giant perturbation on the biosphere, right? And what you can't do is, the technosphere sits on top of the biosphere, and if the technosphere undermines the biosphere for its own conditions of habitability, then you're in trouble. Right. I mean, the biosphere is not going away. There's nothing we could do. Like the idea that we have to save the Earth is a little ridiculous. Like the Earth is not a furry little bunny that we need to protect.
Right.
But it's the conditions for us. Right. Humanity emerged out of the Holocene, the last 10,000 years interglacial period. We can't tolerate very different kinds of Earths. So that's what I mean about a perturbation.
Before we forget, I got to ask you about this paper.
Right.
Pretty interesting.
I'll skip this one for now, and I want to see Drake equation section. But of course, do watch that if you want.
Let's return back to the question of how many alien civilizations are out there, and talk about the Drake equation.
Yeah.
Can you explain
Please.
the Drake equation?
People have various feelings about the Drake equation. It can be abused, but basically it was the story actually is really interesting. So Frank Drake in 1960 does the first ever astrobiological experiment. He gets a radio telescope, points it at a couple of stars, and listens for signals. That was the first time anybody done any experiment about any kind of life in the history of humanity. And he does it, and he's kind of waiting for everybody to make fun of him. Instead, he gets a phone call from the government, says, "Hey, we want you to do a meeting on interstellar communications."
Holy moly.
So he's like, "Okay." So they organize a meeting with like just 8 people. A young Carl Sagan is going to be there as well. And like the night before, Drake has to come up with an agenda. How do you come up with an agenda for a meeting on a topic that no one's ever talked about before, right? And so he breaks what he does. What's so brilliant about the Drake equation is he breaks the problem of how many civilizations are there out there into a bunch of sub-problems, right? And he breaks it into 7 sub-problems. Each one of them is a factor in an equation that when you multiply them all together, you get the number of civilizations out there that we could communicate with. So the first term is the rate at which stars form. The second term is the fraction of those stars that have planets, F sub p. The next term is the number of planets in the habitable zone, the place where we think life could form. The next term after that is the fraction of those planets where actually an abiogenesis event, life forms, occurs. The next one is the fraction of planets on which you start to get intelligence. After that, it's the fraction of planets where that intelligence goes on to create a civilization. And then finally, the last term, which is the one that we really care about, is the lifetime. How long you have a civilization, now how long does it last?
Well, you say we humans.
We humans, right? Because we're staring at the multiple guns pointing at us. Nuclear war, climate change, AI. So how long in general does civilizations last? Now, each one of these terms, what was brilliant about what he did was, what he was doing was he was quantifying our ignorance. Right? By breaking the problem up.
Quantifying our ignorance. Totally. And it is similar to the parameters that he was discussing before when he was talking about the simulations that they run.
Into these 7 sub-problems, he gave astronomers something to do. Right? And so, this is always with a new research field. You need a research program, or else you just have a bunch of vague questions. You don't even know really what you're trying to do.
How to approach them.
So, the star people could figure out how many stars were forming per year. The people who were interested in planets could go out and find techniques to discover planets, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, these are their own fields. Essentially, by creating this equation, he's launching new fields.
Yeah, that's exactly. He gave astrobiology, which wasn't even a term then, a roadmap. Like, okay, you guys go do this, you go do that, you go do that. And it had such far-reaching effect on astrobiology because it did break the problem up in a way that gave useful, sort of marching orders for all these different groups. Like, for example, it's because of the Drake equation in some sense that people who were involved in SETI pushed NASA to develop the technologies for planet hunting. There was this amazing meeting in 1978, 1978 and 1979 that were driven in some part by the people who were involved in SETI getting NASA together to say, look, how, what's the roadmap for us to develop technologies to find planets? So, the Drake equation is absolutely foundational for astrobiology.
I love that he has, of course, a section for the Fermi paradox here. So he actually speaks about it quite at length, in fact. It's going to go, all of this is preparatory, of course. And then we go into alien civilization colonizing Mars and searching for aliens, alien megastructure. Yeah, I remember Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about this. Kardashev cell detecting aliens, warp drive, cryogenics, what aliens look like. Oh, but this is amazing. Alien contact. Okay, so I think as a foundation discussion, this is good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sections we watched. I didn't even notice there was a 35 video. Man, it's probably going to be very long with all the stuff also I add when I talk and share my thoughts. But do share yours. I love watching these. So I'm going to stop it here for this episode. And then if you guys like it and this goes well, we'll make a second one where we actually dive into all of the alien stuff. I love it. But this guy is great. I really like this guy. And as always, I like Lex Fridman a lot, the way he interviews and follows along and adds comments that are relevant with his guests, always in a polite way. So this was really nice. It was really nice to watch. And I hope that if you weren't aware of this, now you are. And so maybe you can go and check it out and click the link in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you so much to you for watching, to the Professor Adam Frank for his explanations, because it was very technical, but it was also easy to follow. Even though, of course, I don't have the basis to fully comprehend what he's talking about, I can at least have an overall idea of what he's talking about without understanding the depth. But he's an excellent teacher, because even though these are deep topics, he knew how to still sound professional and explain the things and use the terminology and go deeply, but not so deep as he could, of course, that then the public wouldn't be able to keep up or follow along. Fantastic explanation. Massive thank you to Lex Fridman, of course, and I will see you tomorrow for the next daily upload. Thank you so much, number ones. Goodbye. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.